hemisphere emphasis is a powerful first impression. Again, it's a statement that we're going to see repeated in other measurements in the horoscope. It's a theme that that will be repeated within a client consultation. And what I mean by that is when I started after doing consultations for 6, 7 years, I started to become keenly aware that when I'm speaking in plain English to my clients without using astrological jargon to talk about the pressures and the opportunities in their life, the resistance that I would get more often than not would be from the hemisphere emphasis. The first thing that I had seen when I looked at their horoscope, I'm usually talking to the hemisphere emphasis, which we're going to explain what that means, or I'd be talking to the needs of their moon in plain English. So I've come to respect the hemisphere emphasis as a starting point and a strong consideration that can be trusted because everything else in the horoscope is going to support it. So let's start. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. In the next 90 minutes, we are going to learn how to identify a hemisphere emphasis in the horoscope. I'm reading this for anybody who can't see this on screen. What each hemisphere emphasis suggests, not that it means it, but it suggests, it's a potential, and how to talk about hemisphere emphasis in a way that's meaningful and helpful to a human being. You know, people get frustrated with astrologers because, oh, I went to an astrologer and he said my moon was square toasters in Zebulbob, and that didn't help them. So we have to find ways to translate what we see to our client, and then why we should trust the first impression of the hemisphere emphasis. So the first thing I'm going to do is review what the hemispheres are. And I looked at Cafe Astrology as my source for getting some of this definition. Some of it applies to what Noel Till taught me, and some of it doesn't. But let's just define our terms. So in the Northern Hemisphere, David, let me know if there's any talk going on in the peanut gallery.
Right. Yeah, I'll let you know. So far, so good. Yep.
Okay, so I want to make sure everybody's on board. Okay, so with the Northern Hemisphere, Cafe Astrology tells us that houses 1 through 6 involve the development of our personality. So yeah, okay, so this is all of the me. Well, these are the me houses to a certain extent. That's how I learned it back in the Stone Age. You know, your sense of identity, what you have, your possessions, how you need to think, which is the 3rd house, and the 4th house being your family, your parents, your 5th house, maybe you're thinking about your creative self-expression, 6th house, service, the cooperative process, all the things that we're doing before we're ready to go out into the world. And Cafe Astrology says that people with a Northern Hemisphere emphasis tend to be private and subjective. Okay, why? What does that mean? We're going to get there. The Southern Hemisphere emphasis is the outer houses, the upper realm here, the we houses, you know, our relationship, the 7th house, our values, the 8th house, our collective belief system, the 9th house, and then our societal structures and authority by the 10th, and our associations and friendships and groups in the 11th. And then the 12th being our collective subconscious and institutions where we house people that we don't know what to do with in the rug. So this is a social, collective, and objective portion of the chart. And Cafe Astrology tells us that this emphasis tends to be more concerned with outside events, whether they are affected personally or not. Okay. The Eastern Hemisphere tend to be self-motivating, initiating, action-oriented, and self-assertive, and they believe strongly in free will. I don't know if that's true. But these houses certainly do convey a sense of personal authority. The lower houses, 1, 2, and 3, seems to be all about I, and the upper houses, 10, 11, and 12, refer to areas of life where the institutions have a certain level of authority, governments, groups, administrative bodies. The Western Hemisphere, once we start realizing there's more to life than just ourselves, they tend to consider the needs of others before taking action. They may be thought of as being more in the hands of fate, although this is debatable. This is cafe astrology. I think that is also debatable. Um, well, okay, how can we use this to help people? What I learned from Noel, the Northern Hemisphere, you realize that there is a focus on the IC, the home, the family, mother, maybe father if you're a classical astrologer. So you immediately look at an emphasis here as a suggestion of unfinished business in the early home life. There's everything under the horizon, if there's a focus on it, is going to be wrapped up in the dynamics of whatever they had to deal with in the early home. So here's an example of a horoscope with a Northern Hemisphere emphasis, just Jane Austen. And you can see everything below the horizon here. And how I learned to really get a handle on what this idea of unfinished business means is I came up with this visual. I see the North and South hemispheres as a tree. And if you're talking to somebody who has a strong Northern Hemisphere emphasis, you can find out how they are totally focused and wrapped up in the roots of their family of origin and the drama within, which certainly would apply to Jane Austen. Her whole focus, I mean, she's world famous for living with her family for her entire life. She did not marry. She did not get out of the house. Her books have to do with family and domestic entanglements, all of it. So that's how I look at a Northern Hemisphere. So how do you talk to somebody who shows up in your doorstep with this kind of emphasis?